that they get from other worlds. Some still affect their society here and there, but for the most part, they're pretty much disease-free. They have learned, for the one thing, that most diseases, almost all of them, are created and caused by the way we think. And on their world now, there's a far more balanced way of thinking, so they're not prone to disease to begin with. They do occasionally still catch colds and flus, things like that, which can happen to you. As far as cancer and some of our more dreaded disease, they didn't have those diseases. They were aware of how one way it might be possible to cure them through force of spirit, but she would not comment on that because she said to reveal that would reveal certain powers of the mind that we really weren't ready to understand yet, and it's better that we discover and evolve towards these on our own. One of their very serious levels of morality is that they are not allowed to interfere with our personal right to evolve on our own path of evolution. And in areas where the answers to questions actually would do that, they don't. They refuse to offer us information that would interfere with our own discovery. Again, it goes back to each person has his own truth, and everybody's on his own path of evolution. So we all have to go out and discover things for ourselves, and most importantly, we have to make it part of our life, or it just doesn't count. Billy had an interesting question, and I'll get more into this later on the Emmanuel tapes, but as you'll find out later on those tapes, Billy actually travels back in time and meets Emmanuel, and Emmanuel leaves something for him in the future, which Billy does find later on. That turns out to be a piece of foil, and what looks like metal foil. And Billy has taken that to the Max Planck Institute in Munich for testing to see if there was something unusual about it. Well, apparently that the foil was some sort of combination of sulfur, carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen peroxide. It appears to be calcium sulfate or gypsum. They tried burning a little bit of it. There was no smell, and it just turned to a white powder. And he wanted to know what was the origin of this almost unusual little substance, not so different than what things we have here, but where did it come from? Semjase told him that that was a present given to Emmanuel when he was 7 years old by his real father, who is Gabriel, a flesh and blood human being from the Pleiades. That Emmanuel, there was no, I guess you call it immaculate conception. Mary was impregnated by Gabriel, and there was a normal childbirth, and Emmanuel was born just like any other living flesh and blood human being. There was no magic involved there. His father was Gabriel, a physical man, and this was a present given to Emmanuel when he was 7 years old. It was kind of like a keepsake, and it came from a planet called Alcyon. And Billy was a little surprised because Semjase mentioned at this time, she says, this is a keepsake, and Emmanuel was just trying to find a way to leave it for himself. Billy kind of paused because every now and then they kept insinuating that he was somehow had been Emmanuel or was somehow connected with it. And he was having a lot of trouble with this because he had no recognition, really, at that time of ever having lived a life as Emmanuel. But there was constant reference to it throughout the notes, and when we get into the Emmanuel tape, I'll tell you the rest of the story. I wanted to tell you that whole story all in one run so we could get the whole thing in. One of the other really topical things that came up was the subject of abortion. Well, this was, she said, quite different on their world because their technology is so far more advanced. For instance, they can detect pregnancy within 3 days. Okay, so that being possible, then they can create or cause menstruation right away, and it washes it out so there's no life lost. They've also learned that the spirit actually inhabits the body within 3 weeks from the time of procreation, so that they've got a little extra time span there. So when our technology advances and we have the ability to actually detect pregnancy earlier, then that will be a great help. They also apparently put something in their food which stops pregnancy. So whatever that might be, I don't know. That could be helpful for us. Okay, we're up to the 58th contact, which is on Monday, June 28th, 1976. So it's been going on now about a year and a half. Semjase and Quetzal both come in a ship this time, and Billy wants to know if they would go ahead and land their ships on the ground. Typically, when the ship would come in for a contact, they would not sit down on the ground because they didn't want to leave any tracks. So Billy asked them if they would on this particular occasion. Quetzal agreed, and they set the ships down on the ground. And this, of course, when they do that, now the landing gear comes down, and the ship's on the ground, and the gravitational force then of the ship makes an impression on the ground. And then once the ship is gone, it leaves three little nice rings down there going in a counterclockwise fashion, and you can see where the ship actually set down. Actually, what happened was the grass looks similar to like what a crop circle looks like, except they're smaller, of course. They're three round circles where the tripods of the ship set down. The grass is not broken, it's bent over, and it's growing the opposite direction of all the rest of the grass because it's no longer being controlled by the gravity of the planet. The gravitational force of the ship overcomes the gravity of the Earth for a period of time, causing the grass to grow the other direction. It doesn't break it, doesn't discolor it, and eventually it just grows back in when the gravity of the planet naturally overtakes it again. Well, on this particular trip, Billy had a surprise. Semjase brought her sister along. Her name was Plea, and he had an opportunity to not only meet her, but show her how to ride his moped. So he spent about 10-15 minutes with her, and she asked him, that they didn't have much time today, but could she come back at some time and borrow his moped and go for a ride of her own? And she thought this was kind of wonderful fun, and Billy was making fun of us as being barbarians by riding around on these little bikes, and she thought that was kind of humorous. Billy had a question about life in the Centauri system. He had heard from different sources that there had been contacts by ETs from those areas, and wanted to know if there was any truth to that. And Semjase remarked, yes, it was, that there has been contact from beings from the Centauri system, that actually there was three groups of areas in Centauri that supported human life. Alpha Centauri, Beta Centauri, which is called the Barnard Star, and Proxima Centauri. 6 light years away from Earth is the Barnard Star, and there is human life there that frequently makes contacts with us here on Earth. As a matter of fact, I think that Semjase had some friends there and knew these people that were making contacts there. On the 60th contact, which was Thursday, July 29, 76, Billy had some questions of Semjase if she would go over the dates and times of the great catastrophes that had befallen Earth. He was a little confused about the time period of the Great Flood, the falling of Atlantis, and a couple other events that the destroyer comet apparently was creating, and he wanted to get these straight. So she commented, of course, she'd go over these. She says, to begin with, the farthest back date that we'll start with was when Atlantis and Mu destroyed one another. Atlantis destroyed Mu, and Mu was able then to retaliate and actually destroy Atlantis. We went over this story just a little bit before. That was 11,498 years ago. Now, these years, these time periods, are all based on a number of years back from the time they were talking, which in this case was 1976. She says a very large planetoid came close to the Earth 10,215 years ago, and that divided the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, causing great flooding. Water ran over the Mediterranean area and up through northern Africa and into Europe. There was great problems then. The destroyer comet, of which they have mentioned several times and which has wreaked so much havoc on Earth, came by 10,080 years ago, causing severe flooding once again. Now, this comet comes around normally every 575.5 years, but that cycle can vary. Sometimes it varies up to 200 years, but it always gets itself back on cycle, and if you average them out over a number of times, it still comes out to 575.5 years. This destroyer comet came by again 7,957 years ago, and again came very close to the Earth, and there was volcanic action and flooding. It returned again 6,906 years ago, and there's even more flooding again. Apparently, every time it comes by, it's so huge, and the mass of this destroyer comet is so big, as I told you earlier, it's very heavy, dense mass, and its gravitational force is so strong it literally causes massive tidal waves in the ocean. Then there's a kind of a silence for a while until 3,453 years ago. The destroyer comes by, and it is pulling Venus in tow. Now, Venus, as you may remember, was originally a moon of Uranus some years back, and 3,453 years ago was the final time that the destroyer comet affected the orbit of Venus and pulled it into the present orbit that it's in. Billy had a question, too, about the accuracy of the Bible, or if there might be documents that were more accurate than the Bible that we could rely upon historically. And she said, yes, the Sanskrit scribes are far more accurate historically because they haven't been changed at all. The Bible had been altered on several occasions because different power groups, societies, and kings and so forth have made slight alterations, good or bad, to serve their own interest, where the Sanskrit scripts had never been changed at all. They had never fallen prey to any power or leader that had altered them. Likewise, the original writings of Enoch and the Mayan calendar, she felt, were among the very most accurate pieces of information we could look to for historical data, and to the Mayan calendar for prophetic things that would happen in our future. As I mentioned before, Venus was originally a moon of Uranus. It was torn loose from Uranus 8,590 years ago. It pulled itself out of its orbit and went into a random orbit in our solar system. There, once again, 7,957 years ago, the comet once again was caught up by the destroyer comet as it passed through, and its orbit was changed again. Again, it was in sort of a random pattern in our solar system. Once more, 6,906 years ago, when the comet came through, it once again gave Venus a little tug, and Venus was running dangerously close to the Earth. 4,058 years ago, the orbit is changed once again as it closely comes by the planet Earth. And finally, 3,453 years back, Venus is finally towed into its current orbit. It swings around the sun very close and is greatly heated up. That's why it's hot today, and went into its current orbit. Velikovsky believes that possibly Venus came out of the planet Jupiter, but the Pleiadians are telling us different. Velikovsky's assumption is because he was trying to explain somehow how it got so hot. And because originally, as the Pleiadians say, it was a moon, an ice-covered moon, and when it swung around the sun, became very close, it was greatly heated up, and that's why it's hot today and in the orbit that it's in. Billy wanted also, by the way, the destroyer came by again in 1680, which wasn't that far back, and there are records, some astronomy records in Zurich, Switzerland, that certain astronomers did actually make note of a very large comet that came through the solar system. It caused practically no damage at all. So there is some notation to support the idea that this destroyer comet is on the cycle that the Pleiadians are talking about. It will appear again, by the way, in the year 2255. Is its projected time to come around again. Wanting to clear up some terms, Semjase said that they call a Sol system as a central sun. And when they speak of a sun system, that can be any planet that has 3 or more orbiting bodies around it. That would make Jupiter qualify, and any planet that has more than 3 moons circling it. Billy took some pictures of the landing tracks, and again, Semjase explained to them, why the grass would look the way that it does. And Billy also took some friends with him out to see the landing tracks. At one point, during another occasion, the landing tracks were actually examined by UFO investigators who were on the scene, and it was found that there were some traces of gamma radiation in the landing tracks, as well as they found gamma radiation in Billy's rifle and his boots, and some of it actually got into his lungs somehow. Well, Billy is introduced to someone new. It appears that Semjase and Quetzal are planning on taking a holiday and returning back to the Pleiades for a period of time. And a lady named Manira is introduced to Billy because she will be Semjase's replacement while Semjase is gone. Well, Billy's in the beam ship with Semjase, and she's explaining this, and they're watching on the sight screen inside of the ship, and Semjase is telling Billy to watch that pretty soon we'll see Manira's ship coming in on the screen, that it's most unusual looking. It doesn't look anything like a beam ship. Apparently it's not the saucer formation, it's some other unusual shape. Well, also it doesn't have tripod landing legs either, so it's going to burn some holes in the ground later on that Billy can also take some rather good pictures of. Well, Manira lands and comes over into the ship, and they're speaking. Billy meets her. She looks much different than Semjase. She's a little shorter, about 10 centimeters shorter. She's very dark brown skin, kind of Jamaican sort of looking, with very dark hair. It's explained that she actually comes from a Vega planet, and the planet name is Duran. and she's going to fill in for Semjase till the end of the year, which will be a period of about 3 months.